I had a friend there, and he had a friend, and so was a Chinese student. He was very happy because he came to study with the help of an agent. Came to study in the University of Miami, but it wasn't told it was the University of Miami in Ohio.
Oh,
yeah. So the student had like all these beautiful images of South Beach on his mind, and I ended up with him between the cornfields.
and the plane's descending. The plane's descending, and he's like,
right. So that still happens in the industry. Of course, there are many good. Yeah,
the plane's
there are many
descending,
good
and he's
ideas.
just like, this doesn't look like the coast. Or G'day and welcome to Global Horizons. I'm your host, Rob Malicki, coming to you today from Garigal Land in Sydney. And tonight, it's evening as we're recording. I'm really stoked about this because it's the first time I've had a guest on the podcast from the other side of the world. And I'm really stoked to be joined all the way from the Netherlands by Edwin van Rest, the CEO of Studyportals. Edwin, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you, Rob. Pleasure to be here.
This is really cool, mate. Thank you for giving me some time. And this will date the recording of the podcast, but we're on the rundown to Christmas, so I'm sure things are crazy getting things tied up. This is really cool because we met for the first time at the AIEC conference dinner. And for those people listening along, you know, we're in the conference dinner, the music's pumping, there are people everywhere. It was a fancy dress costume party, and the theme was Hollywood Nights. And from out of the crowd comes this bloke dressed up as RoboCop. And he comes over, he's got the hood on, and I look down at the name tag and I say, oh, it's Edwin. And you've got written, it's Edwin is crossed out and it says RoboCups. And suddenly I start laughing my head off. Tell me about that costume, mate, and then we can get more into your story.
Actually, I'm upset with you, Rob, because I think you were the one that won the best costume prize ultimately, right?
I think I did, but I think you must have been very close, mate. That was awesome.
Well, very well deserved, because you were looking pretty cool yourself. No, I was RoboCups, and I was keeping the sector safe from the shonks and the crooks running around in the Australian sector. So I thought you could need some help. Actually, it was a concept that I learned from your podcast, actually. I think it was one of your podcasts with Dirk Mulder, where I learned about the concept of RoboCups in criticism of the ill-prepared and not very quantitatively researched caps, the legislation on the way. And also the RoboCup director is a Dutch guy. So, you know, it all came together, and I thought I'm sure the sector is going to appreciate the humor if I show up as RoboCup on that dinner.
I loved it, mate. And it was, as soon as I saw that, I was just like, this is a guy I really want to get on the podcast because there's going to be a great story under the hood here. And maybe by way of starting off, how have you ended up where you are? I mean, Studyportals, amazing organisation, huge reach. But what brought you into international to begin with?
Yeah, so as I just said, I'm a Dutch guy. I was always fascinated by the international dimension of things from an early age on. I loved traveling with my parents. Then I started studying. I'm an industrial engineer. I joined the International Student Association. I made it to the board there. So I always wanted to learn about other cultures and see other countries. And that's how I developed my dream to study abroad. Also, I'm an ambitious guy. So I felt if I was going to go and learn about other cultures, I better go to the full other end of the cultural spectrum. So that's why I developed my dream to study in Japan. Pretty different from the Dutch goal. And ultimately, I realized that dream. So I studied at Osaka University, and that was for me really a transformational experience. I learned a lot academically, but mostly for my personal development. And that's really where I learned firsthand on how international education can enrich lives, in this case, my personal development, but also how it can connect our world and make it a little bit more of an understanding, tolerant, and more equal place. So yeah, that was really fantastic. So that's also where I picked up the motivation when I came back to help my friends to also look across borders initially for their education options. In the Netherlands, it's quite common for students to just pick university that's closest to their mother and offers the right major, right? So that's the kind of the default plan. But the Bologna system was starting. The bachelor master system was being introduced throughout the whole of Europe. And you should realize before that time, when you were you would have an integrated degree program, 4 to 5 years. You would go from year 3 to year 4 quite regularly in that same program. Now you would graduate from a bachelor's program, have to make a new decision if and where to study that master's program. But really, there was no way for students to finally compare those options. To browse thousands of websites that were half up to date, or read, advertisements that universities were putting in the newspapers. There are pretty much no agents helping students here. So yeah, that's really the problem that we set out to solve. Helping students to finally compare other options and make an informed choice across the world and stimulate international education, stimulate students going across borders to enrich their lives and connect the world. That's really the origin story of Studyportals, the origin idea of Studyportals. It wasn't really a business back then. So we started actually solving that problem as part of an international student association, just helping students, if you have an interest of studying abroad, here's what you need to think of, here are the options, etc. And that became hugely popular. And that was a really important evening. I had started this with two friends. They were also in that student association. We were kind of the core drivers of that initiative. And we were working. One of us just came back from Cuba. We had a big Havana cigar. There was one student that got admitted to a university in the north of Sweden, in Dalarna. He was going to study Master of Electrical Engineering, and wanted his admittance documents to be sent to some gospel church. And that fascinated us. So we got in touch with that student, and he said, yes, well, I'm very happy, I'm ready, I'm prepared, but the documents need to be sent there because that's the only place in my village with a post address. And that really struck us. Until that time, I thought sending a Dutch guy to Japan is pretty transformational. But thinking about somebody that comes from a place where it doesn't even have a post address, being able to study a Master's of Electrical Engineering in the north of Sweden, that would just be, so transformational for him and probably his whole family. And we had put a whole lot of blood, sweat, and tears into that initiative until that day. Probably took us 1.5 years to get to a base platform and a base set of universities. And we were, of course, not making any money. There was no revenue model back then, which was just to help students. But we looked at each other and we said, hey, the fact that we just were helpful to this one student on this journey and the impact that it will have, there's enough reward for all of that blood, sweat, and tears. And we need to go all in here. We need to put all of the energy we have into scaling out this impact. And that's when we, decided to go all in and then ultimately started a business and really, really tried to make a big professional initiative out of Studyportals.
At what point did you realize this is going to work? So I've run a number of businesses, and there's always it's quite funny, right? Like I find the first 6 months of a business, maybe the first 12 months, is awesome because you've got all these ideas, you're building all this stuff. And at some point you're suddenly like, holy shit, this thing, I've got too much to do. There's too many things I need to be working on at once. And that's not even the point where you suddenly realize like this business is going to work. So what was it for you guys when you suddenly realized like, yes, this is definitely going to work from a business point of view?
We built the first website. We, of course, needed the collaboration from the universities. And that was not easy. That was the hardest in the beginning. So university would say, we're busy, or yeah, we already have our own website, or there's an initiative from the European Commission that tries to do this. We're busy, and so on. So it took us probably 2 years. We focused on the European top 200 institutions initially. They're already in 27 countries, and we got like half of them to join free of charge. There was no charge in the first 2 years, and that was heavy lifting, right? That was 2 years of begging and, with passion, explaining, but students cannot choose you, it was really emphasizing the importance for students, and about half of them joined. But then the European Commission, actually, they spotted our initiative. There was a big project. The European Commission had a whole Bologna process. They play a big role. They really want the European education market to be more international, to be more standardized. So we also to attract more students from outside of Europe into Europe. So they had started their own initiative, but it was terrible. Rob, it was terrible. It was like guys in Brussels with ties thinking what students need. And they had made it, Atos Origin, which is a big consulting company, they built that platform. I don't know how much they charged for it, but I don't want to know as a taxpayer, but it was terrible. It was like essentially they were trying to copy Google or something, because it was not universities or programs. There were links about universities and programs. It was exploded, useless. Anyway, so and they knew that. Then they found us and they invited us to come to Brussels, and we presented the story, and they invited us to some of their events and their European promotion project. And then at some point, they sent a letter to all universities in Europe for them to join, asking the university to join the Studyportals initiative. And that brought us to a tipping point where, before that time, we were, begging for a week, and maybe we got one extra university finally over the line to join the initiative, to 10, 15, 20 universities per week announcing themselves wanting to participate, even though we hadn't contacted them. So that really got the critical mass going to get the number of institutions there that we need to be able to inform students well. So that was not yet, let's say, a commercial success that I knew like, I could also earn a living with it, but that at least was a very important point where I felt we were gaining the traction to build something really big.
And it's really hard, isn't it? Because, when you're building a marketplace, you've got supply side and demand side. So obviously you kind of need to build both at the same time. You need to build demand, but if you haven't got the supply, for example, the universities, you're not going to be able to build the demand. So it's like this paradox when you're building that kind of business that's really hard to deal with.
Yeah. No, totally. Yeah. So that was a big game changer. And then at some point we realized how important students are for universities and student numbers. When you're in Europe, you don't always realize that because higher education is so much funded by the government. There's many countries, there's no tuition fee or there's very low tuition fee. So you don't understand the economics behind higher education and how important it is to have the right number of students in the classroom. Then actually I became like a part-time staff of the university to help them with their tuition fee strategy, because the Netherlands was introducing tuition fees for non-EU students or market rate tuition fees. And then I started to realize that. And then, obviously we had universities that wanted to use the platform because we had so many students making their decisions there. And that's how we turned it into a sustainable business that could grow from the income it generates.
Nice. Can we just take a little, put up a little sidebar? Because there's probably going to be a lot of people that listen to this that have never heard of the Bologna process, which for you and me is kind of crazy, right? But do you want to just give us the 30 seconds of what that process was, what it actually did to European education?
The European higher education area, it's about 46 countries, if I'm not mistaken. So it's much bigger than the EU. It includes Russia and CIS countries, Norway and Switzerland, of course, as well. But it's really the EU and surrounding countries that have set up a process called the Bologna process. I think it started in about 2000. And the goal, or one of the goals, is to create a uniform, standardized European higher education market. It includes, for instance, a credit system, the ECTS system for academic credit, so that became standardized. And it included also the introduction, essentially the adoption of the more Anglo-Saxon model of bachelor, master, PhD, all with a goal to make Europe more international and to prepare the European labor force more for international jobs and international competition.
You know what? So in Australia, I have to explain this now. About 10 years ago, the federal government decided that they were going to build broadband for every household in Australia. And there was a change of government, and the new government said, we're not going to connect every house to broadband. We're just going to build it as far as the end of the street. And then we're going to connect, we're going to use the existing copper network from the telephone line. So every time it rains here, my internet sometimes just goes out. So it's 2024 and we still don't have broadband to our house. So literally my staff members that work in the Philippines with me have faster internet than I have here in Sydney. It's ridiculous. So anyway, where I dropped out was we just started talking about Bologna, and you had literally just said there are 46 countries in the European higher education area. And that's where it dropped out. So maybe we can pick up from there.
So the Bologna process was a huge factor in the internationalization of higher education in Europe and beyond. So there's the European higher education area. I think it's 46 countries. So essentially it's the EU, but it's a whole lot more. Also the surrounding countries, Switzerland, Norway, etc., with a goal to create a more standardized uniform and therefore also more mobility and more attraction of talent into the European higher education system. And it included, for instance, the introduction of the ECTS system, the European credit transfer system, I think, making it easier for students to be mobile and to move between institutions. It also included the introduction of, or the adoption of, essentially the Anglo-Saxon model of higher education, which is bachelor, master's, PhD, where in most of those countries, it used to be the bachelor and the master combined into one program. In Germany, that would be called the diplom. In the Netherlands, it was the doctorandus degree or a engineering degree or a law degree, all combined into one. So that make a big difference. The goal of Bologna was pretty ambitious to get 20% of students when they graduate have an international experience. That was more than double the level it was before Bologna started. And it had a big impact on students, and also in the way the rest of the world can work with European students or can send European students to Europe.
Yeah, it was really painful, I think, for institutions at the time, but look at it now. I mean, what an amazing piece of foresight to have built that, to actually open the entire education system up to the rest of the world.
And actually, higher education is also one of the success stories of the European Commission. So with the Erasmus program and the role they played in the Bologna process, that is really perhaps some of the most, undisputed initiatives where the whole continent agrees that they are adding a lot of value. And they're not only adding a lot of value to individuals, it's also really a project that delivers on the goals and the mission of the European Union and European Commission by, creating a more unified Europe, by getting students to interact and so on. So that's a big success story. And that also was kind of the wave that we were surfing as we started the company. So that was a perfect timing for us. It created the need for students to have that information, but it also created the push for us to get universities to do something new. It's unbelievable, Rob. I'll give you an example. In the beginning, we had some Dutch institutions, and then we were telling them, hey, we're trying to help, the students to find and compare. They want to know what they can do in the Netherlands, your master's programs. But did you realize your tuition fee is not on your website? They said, they can come to our website. But did you realize your tuition fee is not on your website? And then you know what they would say? What? But it's the same. It's the same. Because in the Netherlands, for Dutch students, the tuition fee is the same, right? Because it's the government-mandated level. It changes every year, but it's always the same for every university. Yeah, but it's the same. Yeah, okay, but if you're from Vietnam or from Brazil, you don't know that it's the same. And you also don't know the rate of the other institutions. So, these were the type of things you had to go through. The most basic, and still today, there's a lot of work to do to really, and that's really our mission, is to help students with the best decision making, right? So all the factors they need to make better decisions. That means discovering all the options out there, discovering the right options, and comparing quickly on the basis of comprehensive and reliable data, and kind of being active throughout their journey so that they make the right choices and get the best out of themselves. That's the reason why we grew so fast. And that's still the main value that we add today that is relatively unique. Also, increasingly, we're helping universities to make better decisions with our data, with market data. And that has a lot of potential too. So a failed program launch cost about $1 million. I don't know how much it costs to keep an unfit for market program alive, but perhaps even more.
Millions. Yeah, millions.
So we help a lot with that by giving them real-time insight into forward-looking data. So not optimizing on the basis of the enrollments of the past, which are essentially students made decisions about 12 or 24 months ago, but really forward-looking data, supply versus demand. There was a good story, I think, to showcase the power that we have there. You probably know the University of Cattolica Sacré-Cœur in Milan. They throw one of the best receptions at these international events. They were forced somehow, I think, with a political reason, to start offering agricultural program on their campus because that was important for the region. They used our data to look at, what are actually the students that are enrolling in those programs, where's the demand coming from for our type of institution, for our competitors, etc. They selected a bunch of countries on the basis of that data that were not on their radar before, and 3 years in, half of the enrollments came from there. And so I think that's really able to illuminate blind spots and create a bird's eye view of the market and improving decision making in the sector, becoming more student centric, more market aware.
I'm sure when you started Studyportals, you probably didn't even think about the data side of things for institutions, right? You're thinking about solving the problem for students. What have been has there been another huge thing that you guys have discovered, something that you didn't know that has kind of blown you away? And even like the tuition fee thing, right? Like when you started, you wouldn't have even realized that was something that you needed to figure out. Have you got any other, like another thing like that just stunned you when you discovered it and went, oh my God?
The amount of misinformation out there. So I had a friend in the US. I lived in Boston for 3 years to set up our American part of the business. As we kind of covered the whole of Europe, we went to the UK, we covered all of that. We went to North America, and then after that, the Asia Pacific region. I had a friend there, and he had a friend, and so was a Chinese student. He was very happy because he came to study with the help of an agent, came to study in the University of Miami, but it wasn't told it was the University of Miami in Ohio.
Oh!
Yeah, so the student had like all these beautiful images of South Beach on his mind, and I ended up with him between the cornfields.
And the plane's descending in his
right. So that still happens in the industry. Of course, there are many good. Yeah, there are many good actors, right?
This doesn't look like the coast. Oh shit.
Yeah, so that, and all of us, we have stories like this about students being misinformed, which we feel pretty terrible about, because it's one of the most impactful decisions somebody can make. It is a big, sometimes it includes years of salary of the grandparents that is invested in that one child to make a difference and to pursue their dreams. And then there's bad information. That's really something that trying to against with transparency, accessibility, good information. To learn at some point there are some pathway providers. They actually have teams that are calling students to tell them they got admitted, because they don't always get that information at the right time from agents and again, there are many good ones as well. But yeah, I think there is the transparency and the quality of information that super important decisions are being made on. Yeah, was much worse in some instances than I thought, because we are here in Europe, we're not so much exposed to that. Students are used to do their own research, just like in most of the Americas. Therefore, that's not something I had understood before knowing the industry better.
Yeah. Related sort of question, but a little bit different too. So your background, industrial engineering, now you're the CEO of essentially a technology company. In some senses, like those engineering skills, problem solving, creation, like are very, very useful. But what skills have you had to learn as a CEO that maybe you never dreamed of that you'd need to learn?
The most important one, self-reflection and developing myself. And which is, I think, a part of leadership. It falls under the bigger leadership umbrella, but I have a couple of strengths, but those strengths can also really be pitfalls if you want to learn and grow a bigger company, right? I'm very solution driven, as you said. But therefore I can also be, perfectionist and wanting to control everything myself, because I'm good at some of the things. And I'm good at some of the things that Studyportals had to do in the beginning, but I've had to develop myself in their journey, essentially from being a small little inventor, coming up with, a solution for students, to a entrepreneur, to a manager, to a part of a management team, and now more like a coach to fantastic leaders that drive the company forward. And some of those skills that helped me in the beginning, they became my bottlenecks or my development areas later on as the business was evolving, sometimes with a lot of energy and tears. And, that's fine. I think it's good that, you're aware that we have a culture and a team that gives me the feedback and the unsalted criticism that's needed. But I think that's the most important thing, to keep on learning and keep on developing yourself. Stay very critical if you're still portraying the best behavior for your type of role. So that I think was the most important one for me.
How have you built that with your team? You said sort of honest feedback, essentially, and allowing people to provide that feedback. But how do you build that into teams? Because obviously it's a scary thing to do, to provide feedback to people, particularly to the boss. Yeah, so how have you encouraged it?
So actually, it's part of our core values. And I can tell you about how we started our core values as well. That's also an interesting story. But one of our core values.
I'm fascinated by that. I'd love to hear that story, because I think.
like I told you, Studyportals was started by 3 friends. We knew each other very well. We had worked together in this International Student Association. So because of that, implicitly, we were culturally aligned in terms of how we want to work together. So, and that included already very open criticism, being really tough on each other. But it also included like work hard, play hard, and a couple of those things. Really commit to success, commit to results. If you promise something, you do it, that type of thing. So because we were so aligned, implicitly, we never had to write it down. Then the company started to grow. And sometimes, a couple of years later, we were hiring 5 or 10 people in 1 month, right? But we had never been very explicit about that culture. We didn't institutionalize that culture. So these groups of 5 to 10 people, they were in a little class. They all started in the same month. They went through their onboarding together. And we started to create little subcultures, some gossip going on, some friction, right? So it caused quite a lot of drama and loss of energy by not being aligned on culture. So I actually started reading about it and started to understand the importance of an institution like culture and communicate that culture and be consistent about that culture. So we did quite a lot. We had like a man on the moon exercise. We went to Sweden with a lot of campfires. We had the whole company contributing to what they think our culture should be and is and so on. So we defined 5 core values and also implementation plans to all of those 5 core values. So our number 1 value is that we want to make our world a little bit a better place. We're not here to collect a paycheck. Life's too short for that. We want to be able to sleep well. We want to be able to be proud of what we accomplish. That's, I think, the most important one that unites the Studyportals people. There's so many people, so many great people in Studyportals, and they're so loyal because of that reason. Also keeps you sharp, also creates a lot of criticism if you do something that's a little bit edgy. But, if I ever have to write a book, it will be about purposeful entrepreneurship and how that can contribute to a better world outside of what politicians have to do and some other people that I think are dropping the ball. So that's core value number 1. But the one you're asking about is we've defined it as we are heads up and hearts open. Heads up is about we're optimistic, we don't see problems, we see opportunities, we're proud of our work. And hearts open is about open feedback, Rob. So, and how do we institutionalize that? One of the most important things is actually we have this in the recruitment process of staff. So before you decide whether you want to take a role at Studyportals, the culture is fully explained to you and you have a cultural interview. Perhaps that's the most important thing. Then we do a lot of other things too. We reflect on it every year. When we have Studyportals Superhero of the Month, then I always connect it to a culture. Last week we had the Christmas event. Then we had the people that were with us 5 and 10 years. More and more people are with us that long. I always connect to on which cultural values they connect most. On this one of Hearts Open, everybody has a personal development plan, right? And it's appreciated to share that openly with your team. So I will share with my team, not only my development areas, what I'm working on, with a request to say, if you see me again going off the wrong, it can be about being too dominant, I'm too detail-oriented, or not listening good enough. If you ever see me going off on that, that's really something I want to learn on. Please correct me. Please give me feedback. So yeah, by showing the example and by showing weakness or vulnerability, I would say, that's how we create that culture. We also have discussions because we also have people from India, we have people from China. They're sometimes really become very uncomfortable when they see somebody challenging me in a meeting. Ooh, this person is, criticizing the CEO. Oh, what's happening, And I'm like, that's fine. Thank you.
But that must make you proud as a CEO. Isn't that the kind of ultimate point you want to get to, is that people feel comfortable enough and safe enough to put up their hand and say, actually, I think you're off track here. Maybe even more, maybe even stronger language than that if they're really comfortable. But isn't that kind of what you want, right? So you can actually be getting meaningful data and feedback, not just on the company performance, but on your own.
Yeah. But there's a cultural element to that, Rob. It's not the same in all cultures and certainly not the same level of comfort in all cultures. And there are multiple ways. So what I learned in Japan, for instance, so in the Netherlands, we almost have an unwritten rule that if you don't say something, it wasn't communicated. So for instance, if I don't like something that you are doing to me now, the Dutch culture would say, I have to say it right now. I cannot complain about it in 2 weeks. That is like, yeah, then you should have, if you didn't like that, you should have said it. You can't complain. That's the Dutch, everything direct and explicit. In Japan, it's 180 degree the opposite, right? Almost nothing what's being communicated is being said. They don't even have the word no. It's not in the dictionary. It's like the most denying things you can say is, oh, that might be a little bit uncomfortable. Well, I'll spare you the Dutch version of that because it's pretty rude. But yeah, that's Japan. So, but what I learned there is that meetings don't take longer. Companies are not run less efficiently. It's a different way, but it's also a way. And that's perhaps what I learned the most from international education, understanding things from a different perspective. When I came back from Japan, my friends thought I was crazy. I was like bowing and I was like, oh, like I had this huge, non-verbal antenna. Unfortunately, I had to break it down a little bit to survive in the Netherlands. But if you do a proposal in Japan, Rob, let's have a drink, right? That's what I would say in Dutch. Let's have a drink. Or come on, we go for a drink. In Japan, actually, grammatically, you would propose not to do it. It's because it's much easier for you then to say, yeah, you're right, Edwin, we should not have a drink. So you would say, Rob, I don't think we should be going for a drink. You don't feel like it, you can say, yeah, Edwin, you're right. But if you do want to join for a drink, then you say, maybe. And then I said, maybe? And I said, yeah, maybe. Maybe. And then, like a couple of iterations, and then go for a drink.
Did you ever get yourself into trouble when you were in Japan because of that? That's such, as you're saying, such a vast difference.
Not go for a drink. Of course, they're going for a drink. Boom. They don't say no, because so then they'll go. And I mean, maybe their wife is, in labor. They'll still go with you for a drink, right? So yeah, of course, I had to build up that sensitivity a lot. And luckily, if you're a foreigner, you get lots of credit. You get a lot of foreigner credit. So they're like, oh, he's a foreigner. He doesn't understand. So they don't blame you that much. But I really became much more sensitive and, diplomatic individual there. But most importantly, because when I went to Japan, I was convinced the Dutch way is the best way. Direct communication, say exactly what you want. It's the fastest. And what I learned in Japan, there's no best way. It's just different. They're both good. Actually, there are many things that are much better at the Japanese way, much more respectful, probably saves a lot of, energy and embarrassment. And that's, I think, part of the gift of international education, that you really can immerse yourself in another culture. And through that, learn so much about yourself, about your own culture and your own cultural bias.
So out of curiosity, I mean, you said that you wanted to go to Japan because it was as far away as you could pretty much go. But what made you pick Japan as opposed to a Korea or a China or somewhere else? So what else was it about Japan that drew you there?
So this was like 2003 when I started making this plan. It took me more than a year to actually realize it because there was no study portal.
Oh, I'm sorry, just for context on that, so interesting. I was working on student exchange back in 2003 from Macquarie University. And you'd remember this well, mate, like the paperwork that you had to do for a Japanese university was like this. Right, like to get admitted to a Japanese university, and everything had to be stamped and signed and then posted off. So
no, 100%. So yeah, that was pretty terrible. So Japan as an economy was much more leading than it is today, in particularly as comparison with China and Korea, the alternative you mentioned. Also, Japan is from the industrial engineering very interesting. So the academic professors that were supporting me also excited about it. They are famous for the Toyota method, the Kanban method, the just-in-time optimization system for factories. And that was kind of my discipline, industrial engineering. So also academically, there was a lot to learn there. And it earned a lot of respect that I wanted to go to Japan. If I would choose today, I would probably go to China for it being such an important force and being such an important force for the future, and me being so driven to try to prevent the Third World War. Rob, because we can contribute to that. Actually, have you ever heard of the concept of a big, hairy, audacious goal?
Yeah, the BHAGs. Yep.
The BHAG, yeah.
So we people haven't heard me explain it for them.
So there's, I think, a book from, I think it's called Jim Collins. It's called From Good to Great.
Good to Great, yeah.
I got there because we used as our operating system for our business, we used the scaling up method from Vern Harnish. And he lended quite a lot of things from Jim Collins. And a part of the principle is that you have to put the dot on the horizon. And he calls that a big, hairy, audacious goal. I think the best example is like when John F. Kennedy said, we are going to put a man on the moon in this decade, right? So something very inspiring. And what it does is that it attracts people, but also it reduces management time, because if your whole staff knows where you are going, you have a clear direction of where you're going, you don't need to manage them that much because you can give them the freedom and still be aligned. So we wanted to set a big, hairy, audacious goal. Our official one was we want to make education transparent globally, because that was what I was running into when I went to Japan, and what was my friends were running into as they were looking for those master's programs. There was no way to find that. So that was the official goal. But actually, unofficially, so then I went to my first conference. Probably not the first, but like my second conference. It was a NAFSA conference in Vancouver. I went with a friend. We rented a tandem bicycle. And we were there, and I was sitting in one of the sessions, and there was a lady, a highest ranking official from the US government. And Obama just came president, and he started this 100,000 strong program with the goal to get 100,000 Chinese to study in the US, but also 100,000 Americans to study in China. And I was sitting there, I remember, I was thinking, 100,000 students. How much impact would that be? Because I know one student and the impact, right? But then it was the eye-opener was for me when she went on to explain that she was actually not from the Department of Education. She was from the Department of State. And this program was their biggest non-military program to prevent a third world war from happening. Because as superpower China, as superpower the US have more connections and people understand each other, the chance that there will be a war is just much less. And I also realized that when I was in Japan, the history, I was with a German roommate and meeting Japanese people, and my grandmother had told me stories about how Japan was in the war. She lost a brother. Really seeing a completely different story and narrative about Japanese people than she, even though she's not a racist or difficult at all, but of course, fed by the war narrative, personal tragedy. I really realized that, Japanese people are just like us. They're just born somewhere. Same for Germans, of course. I have a German wife. So then I came back and said, we can do another big, hairy, audacious goal. And we came up with the unofficial big, hairy, audacious goal, Rob, is to, through study portals, send more students abroad than there are soldiers abroad.
Huh. That's an awesome one. And what's that number? What's that number, Edwin?
That's a good one. It's actually pretty hard to find out how many soldiers are abroad. You can imagine there's quite a lot of confidential information. And unfortunately, it's also not improving. The target's growing. But if you look at United Nations, for instance, all the United Nations missions, both the military as the police missions, in total, they have 110,000 peacekeepers across the world. So we are pretty proud. We think we reached that goal in 2020. More students abroad and soldiers abroad. Last year alone, we did 256,000 confirmed international enrollments. So that's in 1 year already more than double than all the peacekeepers of the United Nations. And these are peacekeepers not with a weapon, but with a smile and maybe some cookies from their hometown, and they're building peace in that way. So that's super cool. I'm really proud about that. And then because we reached that goal, and that links a little bit back to some of your earlier questions, because we reached that goal, we also had to come up with a new BHAC, a new audacious goal. And that is actually a very low number. That is to ensure there's a future where no student will miss out on an education opportunity because of a lack of information. Yeah, and that's a huge, that's equally ambitious, or perhaps even more ambitious and more difficult to measure. But it's big, because if you look at the world today, there are about 230 million students. If you add up all universities, and our core business is helping them to make the best choices. But next to that, there's 1 billion people out there with a desire for higher education, currently no access. And on one hand, there's a lot of good news. There's increasingly flexible programs, online programs, scholarship funds, low-cost, ultra-low-cost education, but often these options don't find the right target audiences. So that's, again, our goal, so the information barrier is actually a huge one. There's, of course, financial and broadband is growing. More and more people have a mobile phone. I understand that there's more people with a mobile phone than with a toothbrush today, but we want to bring down that information barrier. And that's not only about knowing, which options are out there and what the costs are and how you get admitted and what's for free and what can be done online, etc. It's also about giving students the confidence. Yes, because it's often people that nobody in their family has gone to education. They think they're not worthy, or they think they cannot overcome some of those barriers. So that's why we invest a lot, in particular, in students sharing their experiences so that they can see people like them that have gone on the education journey and what it has brought to them and what that journey was like. So we still got a lot of work to do, but yeah, that matchmaker is a very broad sense that can be applied by, getting the best students to University of Sydney, where we already know, for instance, on the basis of the operating system that you have on your phone, we can predict your likelihood to go to Sydney if you have iOS 14 is 25 higher than if you have Android 8. We know that because we have the most data about students and enrollments, but also it's about students that otherwise have no opportunities. And we have these, together with UNESCO, we set up a platform for the Global Access Initiative for that ultra accessible education, because those students with an iPhone or an Android 7 or 6 even, they won't make it to Europe, or they won't make it to typically, of course, there are many other factors, and we try to help everybody. But for them to know what their alternatives are that are achievable for them.
Where does your ambition come from, Edwin? I mean, you said it right up the front. You were just like, I'm ambitious. And it's clear as you're talking about these, putting spots on the horizon to aim your team at and blasting through those. So where for you does that drive come from?
Good question. I don't know.
Actually, that came across really clearly. So as I said, I was like, doing some prep for this conversation, looking at other conversations, and even the way you do your social media and things like that, the way you talk with this confidence and this ambition and this drive to achieve a big goal.
Yeah, I don't know, Rob. I had two, my grandparents on both sides were entrepreneurs, but not huge entrepreneurs, but, they were my two grandfathers. I learned a lot from that. And then as you often see, one generation skips entrepreneurship because of all the trouble it creates as well, and the risk and the anxiety and so on. I'm sure you'll have your story, your part of that story. I think I'm very grateful for the support I got from my parents to do what I wanted to do. They're not rich, but I was able to go to Japan. They supported me in the sense of, if you want to do it, go for it. Supported me to go to university. I also lived in Italy. I lived in Greece, both for the Olympic Games. I feel also I have some talents. I did good at university, and I feel really responsible for doing something valuable with that talent and turning that talent to improve the world. And it's also selfish. It's not only, it's also selfish because that helps me to sleep well. And it helps me to be proud when I later have to explain my grandkids what I did with my career. I think about that. And I'm luckily in a situation, I'm not rich, but I'm in a situation where I'm so privileged. I don't have to worry about food on the table or health of my kids or education for my kids. And other things that are beyond that materially are not so interesting to me, but having a purposeful career and doing something that's helpful to others, that's what energizes me.
That's so true, man. That speaks to me so clearly, because our little worries about, I'm stuck in traffic or, whatever the little problem is so inconsequential when you think about those families that don't have access to clean water. I don't know. Losing 10 minutes in traffic's kind of irrelevant, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the challenge of the human being as well. Everything that's a good thing and a bad thing. Relativity helps you to be happy in the most difficult circumstances. I remember being in Cuba. People have nothing, but they have an old car with a radio and a bottle of rum, and it's a great party. But it also, people that have everything, they're worried about really small things, right? And then they're not happy, even though they have everything. So there are two sides to that, property of human beings, I think.
What's your happy place, mate? So in your ideal world, let's take business out of it, family out of it. Where is your happy place? If you could transport yourself somewhere and just spend a couple of days or a week just doing something that gave you pure joy. Once again, family and business aside.
In the beginning of this year, I had the privilege to live with my family for 6 weeks on Bronte Beach. Yeah, fantastic. Because we were expanding the Australian team, a fantastic team there, and I figured I came to help them out. And we were living on Bronte Beach, and if that would be within, a maximum 5-hour flight from the Netherlands, we would be living there. What a fantastic place, and very hard to find elsewhere, I think, where you have this combination of really nice beach, still a community feeling, so not all high-rise, big hotel chains, but really still a community feeling. I was barbecuing with the neighbor and, became a regular at the coffee shop, of course, with the fantastic coffee that you have. But also still having a cosmopolitan city nearby where you can actually have a meaningful and interesting career within what it was, 15 minutes bus ride or 20 minutes bus ride or something. Yeah, that I think was a really special place. And then I have 2 kids. They love animals and they love being in Australia. And still every day I'm hearing the stories.
They're too young to think about the sharks and the crocs and the snakes and the spiders. Yeah, actually, it's funny you mentioned that. The rock swimming pools that we have here on the coast in Sydney, you don't find that anywhere else pretty much in the world. But it's just a thing here.
Yeah, it's great. It's of course a reason for it too, right? Because the sea can be dangerous, right? So it's pretty necessary, I think, at some points. We did have a casualty at Bronte when we were there, so that's also scary, right? We need to be careful, especially unprepared Europeans like us that are used to calm waters.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? I mean, just thinking about that swimming pool, I often think, and this is something that I think Europe has done much better than Australia, or probably continues to do, is, we invested in that, Australia invested in that infrastructure 100 years ago. And we built rock pools, we established parks, we set up sports fields, we built museums. Like, we did that thing, but I kind of fear that we don't invest enough in that public amenity anymore. Yeah, which is a little bit sad. It's kind of like we're stuck with what we've got and not putting anything else into the system.
Yeah, it goes along the trend, I guess, of more individualism.
Yeah. So, Edwin, great to talk about Australia, of course. Maybe let's, since we're so far from everything here, we've got a lot of water around us, let's just maybe think of the horizon. And you seem to be a very good horizon scanner, like you've talked about setting a point on the horizon for people to aim towards. What do you think is on the horizon in terms of maybe not even just international education, but education more broadly? What do you think is coming at us over, the next 5 or 10 years?
First, I want to say, I think there's a very positive outlook for the sector. And I know 2024 has been hard for many destinations and for many people, many of our partners in the sector. And I know 2025 is going to be hard, and perhaps 2026 too, when we think about Australia. But I think people can take a deep breath and, be proud of their work and remember that the sector is cyclical, right? So we've been here before, we're going to come here again. As the winds of politics ebb and flow, it's important to look to the medium term, to the long term, and think about how, whether you're up on a high or you're on a low, to think about how can I be better in the next cycle? How can my institution thrive in the next cycle? What's also good, I think, is that the sector is enduring. So as the cycles, we're enduring, right? We've got one of our earliest partners, the University of Bologna, was founded in 1088. They survived world wars and dynasty changes and, obviously headwinds that are not comparable to what we're facing now. And then, as many other institutions, also in Australia, they are thriving. They're still thriving and they'll remain to thrive, right? And as the demographics of, I think, the developed world developed quite similarly, with a decline in young people, decline in birth rate, there will be an area of selective immigration in many countries, particularly in Europe, because there's such many immigrants out there. So that will become, unfortunately, quite selective immigration. But within selective immigration, international students are going to stand out because they've proven to be extra entrepreneurial, to be really good in their careers. They still have their whole career ahead of them. They're often already high educated, and they also already have means. So that the sector will go up. Just the question is, when does it swing back for Australia and in some other markets? In the UK, we already see recovery. In Canada, it's very much downhill. Let's please remember that. So what then on the horizon, I think that the more important of the drive of demographics in the labor market and the skill shortages. I think when I think about us, but also education in general, I think AI, technology in general, but in particular also AI and the proliferation of the internet has a huge impact. Obviously, very macro, Robert, to close that gap of that 1 billion people that don't have any access to education today, bring the costs down, bring up access. For us, it also really means adding personalization to the experience of our students. And some people would say AI personalization. That's not true. It's machines. But actually, AI has the power to personalize many of our experiences. Even if you think about a communication you now might have with a call center, you have to wait before you get an answer. That answer often doesn't consider all your personal factors. Actually, AI can make that faster and much more personalized, right? So we launched this year Sophia. Sophia was born in 2024 in Studyportals in the US, and it's probably the country that has the best college counseling infrastructure. There's one college counselor for 524. In many other countries, for instance in the Netherlands, there's pretty much no college counselor. Sophia puts a all-knowing college counselor in the pocket of every student with an internet connection. And C has verified information of all our universities, of all programs, and the student journeys of... We have 2 new students starting on Studyportals, their journey per second. In this podcast so far, already 3,600, Rob, 3,600 new students. And we track them. I think that has huge potential. We're only at the start of it. The same in education. It can help personalize. It can help creating adaptive learning experiences. But the people can then focus on the really high value add. Relationship, personal touch, creative, impactful one-on-one or group work. And a lot of the other things can be supported by artificial intelligence. I'm really excited about that.
Edwin van Rest, thanks so much for joining me on Global Horizons. This has totally lived up to my expectations, mate. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, and thank you for the great work you do.
Likewise, mate.
It's a pleasure to be here.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Global Horizons podcast, consider subscribing to our newsletter. Search for Global Horizons podcast and then just pop in your email address, and that way you will never miss out on all of the critical international education news that you need to stay up to date with. This episode has been produced on Garigal land in Sydney. Our video and audio editor is Len Zamora, and I'm your host, Rob Malicki. Have an awesome day. See you in the next episode.